Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 2 of me talking to the camera. It still feels a little bit strange to consider it a podcast because I feel like podcasts usually have a little bit more of a topic, but I guess we kind of have a topic, talking about what I made today. So, since we last spoke 2 weeks ago, I have finished one crochet project, a little bit of spinning, and managed to start a couple more projects and acquire more yarn. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing is my finished objects. I'll start with the yarn I spun because it's going to be a quick thing to talk about. I don't usually use a lot of my hand spun yarn, not because I don't like working with it, but just because for me it's much more fun to spin it than it is to actually use it. I've had a subscription from Paradise Fibers for their Fiber of the Month club for about 4 or 5 years now, and I never remember what these are called later, but I love what they send because it always is surprising. It always has fibers I haven't considered using. It's a lot of fun that way. So these are some old colorways they have sent before. The first one is this. Really pretty it's a red with some gold tones and little bits of white. Not really getting a very good focus on it. Sorry, my camera does not do great with autofocus. It came out about a DK weight, and as you can see, like, this is all I have, so this might be enough to make like some gloves, maybe combine it with some other stuff for a scarf, a shawl. It's one of the reasons I don't always use my hand spun. I have a hard time coming up with projects to do with it, but it makes me so happy to make it, so I'm going to keep making hand spun anyways. The other one happens to be a green. I did not mean to have kind of Christmassy colors, but that just was what I was working on. And this one also, you can barely see the white, light greens. It's one of the reasons I love getting the fiber as a surprise. I get colors I might not have chosen, and there's always just those little extra flecks in there that you're not gonna get if you just like took one kind of fiber. I get this surprise blend. A lot of the times my Fiber of the Month has merino wool, sometimes it's Corriedale, and then sometimes they get much more out there with yak. I've received camel, pineapple, rose, seasell. You get a lot of surprising fibers when you just trust somebody else to pick it out for you. So those are my hand spuns. Feel like I went off on a tangent. My other finished object is the sweater I was working on for my daughter. So this is the mini puff jacket. Can't really see the picture super well. Got to get better autofocus going. It's the mini puff jacket from Pink Sheep Design. It is a crochet pattern. I worked this one using Bernay blanket in black and vintage white. My daughter wanted it to be a little oversized, which on the upside it allows me to model it for this. So it's cropped with little pockets, and then her choice was to have the addition of a hood, which is not in the original pattern. This is the third time I have made this particular pattern from Pink Sheep Design. The first time I used the recommended hook size and I felt like the weave was a little too open. So then I made another one partially to get different colors and partially to get a little bit tighter of a weave. This is the second one I made. And this kind of lets you see the difference between with the hood and without, so I can describe what I did. So I went down 1 hook size from the recommended to get a tighter weave, and then this big, see if I can get it in frame, this big collar that the pattern comes with was actually very, very easy to adapt to this hood. Basically all I did was take this big collar portion and just keep working up and increase just a little bit on the outside, and then once I got it tall enough, sew it together at the top. It was a really easy adaptation of a big collar into a hood. If it wasn't such a big chunky yarn, it probably would have taken a lot longer, but I was very happy with how it came out because I don't make a lot of things with hoods. I think this is maybe my second or third hood ever, so to have it actually work out, I was very happy with. It is a little bit of a big hood. Like, my daughter put it on and it would go all the way over her face, but you know, she kind of giggled and liked it that way, so I did not have to pull it out and redo it. One of the things I like about this particular pattern is because it is bulky yarn, it works up really fast. The longest I have spent on any of these jackets is probably this one, where I spread it out over 2 separate weekends. But the first one I did it in about a day. So I can see why people kind of like working with chunky yarn. I don't think this chunky yarn is going to become the only thing I ever work with. I definitely found that my hooks kind of squeaked against the Bernay yarn, which I was not a fan of. It wasn't too bad, but it was a little distracting. So I think I'll try to avoid that in the future. I do have one more of these jackets that I'm going to be working on. I'll talk about that yarn a little bit later with my new acquisitions. But after that, I may be done with this pattern for a little while. But I mean, it's a cute little kind of bomber jacket, so doesn't mean I'll be done with it forever. All right, so some of my works in progress. A couple of them you have seen last time, and then 3 are going to be new for sharing. So the first one I will talk about is my Magic Spring Shawl. This was a free pattern I downloaded several years ago and obviously printed up. This is not the first time I've made this particular pattern. I will link it down below. I was working on it using Teton Yarn Company's yarn in 3 different colors. Purple Majesty, Brenite, I really need to figure out how to pronounce that, and Last Light. So when we last talked, I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to stick to my original plan. I had started out with Purple Majesty, where I had picked it out because it still makes me think of a sunset. I don't know what I'm going to do with my leftovers, but this is definitely something I'm going to use up every little bit. I still really love this. And then I also had the Brenite, which is gray, and you can really see the little zebra a little bit better in this one. And then my last color was Last Light. And my original plan had been to start with my Purple Majesty, go with this lovely gray whose name I can't pronounce, and end with Last Light. And then I started second guessing myself and trying to decide if I should do it that way instead. I did finally decide to just stick with my original plan. You might be able to see the string sticking down, because I figured this pattern, as you can see, it's supposed to be a nice color block of 3 different shades. And I really didn't want it to blend too much. I didn't think that the Purple Majesty and the Last Light would blend and fade into each other quite as well as they did. And so I finally decided if I put these two next to each other, it's really going to look like I just ran out of yarn and this part is going to stick out. Whereas when it's in the middle there, it looks very intentional. And it gives that color block that the pattern had. So, when I last showed you, I had just finished right... Oh, did I drop a stitch? Okay, no. I had just finished right down here where my stitch marker is with the Purple Majesty and was about to change colors. I had not yet decided what color to go with. And I am now, I think about 2/3 done with my middle panel. I had to take a little bit of a break from this one. And I'm hoping to get back to it because I'd really love to get into the third color. Partially to see if I'm still really happy with the color blocking as it is, but also just, I mean, winter's not going to last forever. I'd really like to finish this while there is still time to wear it and not be too warm. I know there's always next year, but it's no fun finishing something and then having it just sit there for an entire year in the closet. And I'd still be able to look at it and see that it's pretty, but I'd much rather take it out into the world and enjoy it that way. So I'm still working on this one. So far I think I'm really happy with sticking with my original plans. I don't think I'm going to know for sure if it was a good idea until I actually see all three colors worked together. So I really need to pick this back up a little bit. I got distracted with other projects, and I had... Last weekend, my fingers started getting really, really sore. It's something that happens occasionally when I'm using a lot of fingering weight yarn. I think I have a tendency to hold it really tight. When I taught myself how to knit, I taught myself where you hold the yarn in the right hand. I can never remember if it's continental or English, each kind. But I taught myself hold it in the right hand, throw it around. That was just what I learned from the book. And I've recently started trying to teach myself how to hold the yarn in my left hand, partially because I've heard it's faster, it seems to be faster for me, but also because I want to give my hands a break and not always be doing the same motion. I'd like to still be able to do things like this for another 40 years. You know, I want to die with my needles in my hands, not with unfinished projects. So I'm trying to do what I can to preserve my hands, switch up the muscle motions. It's part of why I enjoy the fact that I both knit and crochet, because they use different muscles in your hands. At least it feels that way to me. I'm not a doctor, so maybe they don't. But I haven't quite mastered doing yarn in my left hand with fingering weight yarn. I've learned how to do it a little bit better with worsted and bulky. I'm still working on fingering weight yarn, and it ends up meaning that if I'm doing a lot of projects with fingering weight yarn, I hold the yarn so tight and I end up with my knuckles hurting really bad. And unfortunately last weekend I had to basically take 2 days off of knitting and just not touch any of my projects. I tried crocheting, and even that hurt. It got to the point where my hands just hurt to exist, so it was a very sad weekend for me. Obviously you can see I'm moving my hands. I'm feeling a little bit better now. Working on making sure I remember my stretch breaks and things like that. But unfortunately it meant this project got put in timeout, as it is a fingering weight project that was really irritating my hands. Another project that unfortunately was also in timeout due to my hands being sore is the other project I had last week. So last week when I showed these socks, I had the cuff of one sock. I always work my socks in tandem, partially because I do double pointed needles most of the time, and I'd like to try the magic loop 2 at a time. I'm a little bit concerned about how confusing that would be, but if you want to push yourself, you want to learn new things, you obviously have to try new things. Maybe I'll hate it, maybe I'll love it. But after I finished the cuff that I showed you, it might have been the sock, might have been the other one. It doesn't really matter, I guess. I did the cuff on the other one, worked myself down to the heel, and as you can see, I am now on the foot for both socks. I have been trying to make these one size smaller than I usually do because the last few pairs of socks I've made felt a little bit loose, and then you could kind of feel them bunching up and sliding on your feet. So one of my first attempts at fixing that is just trying making one size smaller from a pattern instead of just, oh well, I always cast on these many stitches. And then if that still doesn't make a sock that fits right, I'm going to try going one size needle down. So these are a simple vanilla sock using a no wrap heel. I used to always do a heel flap and gusset, and I decided to try something new, and I do kind of like not having to pick up the stitches at the end of the heel flap. I'm sure I'll do heel flaps again because they do fit very well when I wear heel flaps, but I definitely am enjoying this no wrap heel for right now. This yarn is Fireside Flannel from Muse 2320. It's her Mockingbird 2-ply fingering weight. It's a 80/20 merino and nylon. I will link her shop down below. And I am working these socks on 3mm double pointed needles. I know that's a little bigger than a lot of people do. 3mm is what has worked for me for a while. I used to do them on 2mm, and I just slowly worked up. Maybe it's because I tend to hold my fingering weight yarn really tight. I'm not quite sure why, but 3mm works for me, so that's what I've been sticking to for a while. Hopefully next time we talk, I will have a finished pair of socks. These are currently like, this is what I call my car project. So other than when they came inside, these live in my car, and then in the morning before work, if the building isn't unlocked or if I have a little bit of time on a break, I sit and I work and I watch YouTube or lectures for school and work along on my socks. This has not all been done in my car this time. When I brought them in to talk about them last time, I did do a little bit of work before I went back to work. So by the time I actually put them in my car, I think I had all the way down to the heel on one sock and had started about that far on the other. So I did have a head start. This is not 2 weeks in the car, not quite that fast in the amount of time I have in it in my car. But yeah, hopefully in 2 weeks I will have a finished pair of socks in here. So another project, I did not talk about it last week, but it did get a little bit of work. This is one that I have been working on for about a year now. I can actually look it up. I've started changing the way I record my projects, trying to put it in a book, and because I'm still working on this one, I did go back and look up when I started on it. So, flip, flip, flip. So I started on this in May of 2022, and the pattern that I am working on is the Beekeeper's Quilt. So the Beekeeper's Quilt was something I started in an attempt to use up leftover sock yarn. I've been making socks for over a decade. I honestly have no idea when I made my first pair of socks, but I kept all of the tiny little leftover bits of yarn. I know hoarder is not exactly the chosen term, but it was always one of those where it's like, yeah, but I don't want to get rid of it. That's still so much yarn. I can do something with it. And then it was just sitting there. So about a year ago, it just kind of started getting on me of, I want to do something with that leftovers. And I found the Beekeeper's Quilt, which uses a bunch of tiny little hexagon puff balls. They're each stuffed with just a little bit of stuffing, so it's double-sided, and I am making mine using leftover fingering weight yarn from various socks I have made over the years. Some of them are socks I have made within the last year. Some of them I made a long time ago. Like, I don't even remember what all of this yarn is. I've had them so long. I don't even have the socks for most of these anymore. It's, as you can see, these are very tiny, maybe 2 inches across. So when I first started making it, it was like, oh yeah, this is so cute. It'll be so easy. And these little puffs are easy. But I didn't really think about how many it would take to make a blanket. And then I finally had made like 5 or 10 and read through the pattern, and it said to make a throw size blanket you need about 350. And I wasn't planning on like necessarily a bed size blanket, but it was definitely one where it's like, I should have thought about this a little more before I started this project. So I have maybe 30 or 40 total. I started out with a little bit of a, it's gonna be a long-term project, no worries, I'll work on it for a few years. And then kind of got into a little bit where I'll make one every day, because it'll take me between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on how fast I'm working. But then that kind of became, well, what if that's all I end up having time to do that day? Because that's 30 to 45 minutes. I may not even have that some days. So I made a lot at the beginning. I started making a few recently. Like these are from socks I just finished a couple weeks ago. And I just kind of decided I wanted to work on it a little bit again. But I also decided that a smart thing to do would be to start sewing some of them together, which was technically my intention from the beginning. Make some and then randomly pull them out, put them together, sew them together so that I'm not sewing 350 of these all at once. But I also figured I have just enough that I could make like a tiny cushion for the cat or something if it turns out that I don't like the way this is going to move. Because as you can see, because these are filled with stuffing, it is kind of stiff. I'm not sure if it's going to be a blanket I'd want even as a throw size. So I started sewing them together. I'm going to try to finish sewing all of these together and then decide if this is something that is going to be turned into like a pillow or a cat blanket, or if I'm going to keep going. I definitely kind of got a little bit of an itch to start working on scrappy projects recently. I really should not have binged Crazy Sock Lady's Scrappy Sunday videos, because now I want to make about 500 scrappy projects, and I have a whole bunch of other non-scrappy projects I also want to work on. So I definitely want to determine if this pattern is going to be something I want to continue to be an actual blanket or turn it into something smaller. When I first sewed it together, it was like, ooh, that's nice, but like, you know, you move it around and it stays pretty stiff. So as far as a blanket, I don't necessarily want a blanket that will stick out like that. And I'm not going to know what sort of drape it's going to have until I get a few more on there. Who knows, maybe it will just turn into wall decor. That actually might be very pretty, and it would be another way for me to appreciate these. And they only use a little bit of yarn for each one, so I still have so much of all of these yarns. Other than this one where you can see like I ran out of brown right there and split it with another one, which I think makes that one look a little like a cupcake. I really like it. So I'm still going to have enough of these left over to make something else if I decide not to make a full-size throw. We'll see. We'll definitely see this project again. I don't know if you'll see it again in 2 weeks or in 6 months. We will see how I feel about it later. So those are the ongoing projects. 2 you had seen before, 1 you hadn't, but I recently picked back up. I have 2 new projects that I have started since we last spoke. One is part of a crochet along. It's sort of a mystery crochet along. It is from Alt Knots, and it is for a full-size blanket for, it's being called a Stitch and Scream crochet along. So Alt Knots is a YouTuber. She does a lot of like horror-inspired crochet. You should absolutely check her out if you haven't seen her. She's a lot of fun. And she will do monthly horror movie watches, so called her Stitch and Screams. And this is going to be a year-long blanket everybody works on together. I don't usually watch the horror movies with everybody because while I like some spooky, I'm not actually really big on like horror. I like more of like cute Halloween, cute horror, but I really did like the idea of the blanket. So the blanket, every month it's going to be a new crochet stitch, and when you're done you get a nice size blanket. When I decided I wanted to do this, I thought the squares were going to be like maybe 12 by 12 and you'd end up with like a throw size blanket, but I am halfway through the first square and it's supposed to end up being 23 inches by 23 inches. So this is going to be a nice size blanket. And the first stitch that she did is a spider stitch. You're definitely not going to be able to see it very well because I chose black for my first color. I decided on black because I have quite a bit of Wander acrylic yarn from Furls, and I wasn't sure how much I would need for each square, but I had 3 balls of black, so it was like, wow, I should be able to finish it, and apparently I'm going to need about 2.5, so I may need to buy some more for some of the other squares in order to have enough balls of particular colors. She's doing hers in 2 colors. I'm thinking I'm going to pick a different color for each month based on what I have, what the stitch is, what I'm in the mood for, maybe theme it month by month for what makes sense for, like maybe do a pink or a red for February for Valentine's Day. But I definitely felt like a spider stitch in black made sense. I guess technically the color is Obsidian. So I will link her YouTube page and her Stitch and Scream down below as well. I am working my square using a 5.5mm crochet hook from Furls. This, I believe the color was Cherry, but it is one of the Streamline resin hooks. I absolutely love these. I think the only project I have not enjoyed these with much is I don't really feel like a resin hook worked very well with my Bernay blanket yarn. I'm not sure if that's why it squeaked or if that's just what that yarn does, but I definitely love these hooks. They're nice on my hands and they're so pretty. The other new project I have started is part of my attempt to challenge myself. So I put out a video last week where you saw me actually making this bag. And then I have a little random wheel on my phone that I spin to pick a new kind of project, something that I was thinking about doing but haven't gotten around to doing, or something that I don't challenge myself very much in. I tend to do vanilla socks, so maybe do some socks with something different, things like that. What I actually spun this time was for a pair of pants / shorts. So over the summer I saw so many people doing like crochet a pair of shorts and it was like, ooh, that'd be so cute, but I never quite got around to doing it. It was one of those where it's like, yeah, but I don't really wear shorts, whatever. So I included pants and shorts in my challenge as a way to tell myself, hey, like, you kind of wanted to make it. You have yarn to make things like that. Why not try making pants or shorts? So because it came up in the winter, I decided on a pair of joggers. I am doing the Joost Pants, Joost, from Lion Brand. I will link the pattern down below. It was a free pattern I found for a pair of joggers. And I am working it using a Hobbii Mega Ball. It says color number 425. It's a gray. I bought a few of these and I think I have 3 different colors. I had heard that they were super, super soft, and as it is a 100% acrylic yarn, it was like, ooh, you know, that might work well on my Addy machine. It would definitely work well for things that I want to be able to throw in the washer versus an actual like wool soak. I work with small children, I have a small child, so having at least some handmade items that I can put in the washer on a delicate cycle, that is definitely nice for germs and dirt and things like that. So this is a 400 gram ball with 1,312 yards of 100% acrylic yarn. And I actually have 2 of these in gray, so that should be more than enough to knit a pair of joggers. If it's not, then I probably did something wrong in the pattern. It seems like it should be enough. This one should be enough. So, unfortunately, I had to wait a little bit to get started on these due to my hands hurting, but I have been able to work on these with the yarn in my left hand. So that's been very good practice for this. This is a number 3 light yarn. So not quite small yarn, but I'm getting a little bit smaller. So I have a nice long rib section done, and I have been working on increasing at the waist and to go around the hips and everything. I barely started on those increases, so I've got a little ways left to go, and then it will be time to work on the legs. So I'm really hoping to have some good progress on this before we see each other next. But it's definitely, like, this is a big project to work on. It's very much a simple pattern. A lot of it, like, I had a 1x1 rib and then it's knit stitch. The hardest part for any of this so far, I think, would probably be the fact that it had some short rows in the back, but even then, like a short row with a wrap and turn, it wasn't a whole bunch, and it really was just, oh, well, that's more purling. I don't mind purling that much. I know a lot of people don't like it. It's not my favorite, but it's not going to stop me from doing a project. So while these are still a very simple project, it's something I've never done before. I've never made pants, and I'm really hoping that these will be as comfortable as they look. Like, they look like really comfortable pants. And with the acrylic, I'm hoping they won't be too warm. Like, warm enough in the winter, but not too warm to not be able to wear them year-round when I just want to be cozy. So that is all of my works in progress. And then I have a little bit of yarn and a little bit of fiber for spinning that I have received in the last 2 weeks. And one more project that I'm planning on starting. I had originally thought I would already have it started by now, but my hands were hurting, and I mean, usually I max out at about 3 projects going at a time. I usually have my card project, an upstairs project, and a downstairs project, so that I don't have to constantly be moving my projects around or be without my yarn somewhere. And I tend to pick where they go based on how complex the project is. Like, a card project is going to be small and simple. A downstairs project might be one that's going to take me a lot more work, so when I'm downstairs watching things with my kiddos, I can sit with them, I can talk, I can still be there, and my time will be available, but I'm also not having to pay too close of attention to kids shows if I don't want to. And then my upstairs project would usually be something kind of soothing that I could do without too much brain power at the end of the day. Occasionally I also have another project for watching lectures for school, but lately I have been able to combine that with car project or my upstairs project, which is my pants right now. So, I mean, having 5 projects going at once is not normal for me. The next project I'm going to start will probably be started after I finish my Stitch and Scream square. We'll see about that. Alright, so the one project that I have planned to start in the future, it may not have been a smart choice for me to decide to do this. I've only ever tried to do 1 year-long project ever before. It was a long time ago, and I was attempting to make a temperature blanket, but I thought it'd be fun to make it as like a temperature scarf. I figured that that would be a little bit more doable for me, and I ended up giving up halfway through the year. I decided I hated my colors, I hated the project, I kept falling behind. I'm not someone who has a passionate yes or no on temperature blankets. I think it's like everything else. If you want to make one, make one. But that year, that project was absolutely not for me. And it's the only time I've ever tried a year-long project like that. And yet, for some reason, this year, I've decided to join two. So I'm working on the Alt Knot Stitch and Scream Crochet Along, where every month I will have one square to make on a blanket. And then the other one that I decided I wanted to do is a mystery knit along from Expression Fiber Arts. And I mean, I can't show you a little picture, but it's not exactly like it's going to tell you what it's going to look like because it's a mystery. So the pattern name is Advertence, and it is from Janica York Carter and Expression Fiber Arts. And I honestly have no idea why I decided this would be a good idea for me. I'm a little bit worried that I will not have the stamina to keep going all year, but at the end, if I keep going, I will have a very large shawl. The way she describes it, it's a little bit smaller than a blanket, a little bit larger than a shawl. And I really do like the idea of it. And I mean, I know technically I don't have to finish it at the end of the year. It's just going to be, the clues are going to come out slowly over the year. And as we're 2 weeks in and I haven't even started it, I definitely feel like I need to keep my expectations reasonable about finishing it by the end of the year. And if I don't, it's okay. So obviously Expression Fiber Arts is a yarn company. They dye their own yarn. So naturally they have their yarn that they have recommended. I'm trying not to just take every excuse to buy new yarn right now. I'll talk a little bit more about my yarn buying in a minute when I talk about the new yarn I have. But I decided that I was going to pull from my stash, and this seemed like a really good choice. The pattern technically calls for a sport weight yarn, and this is a fingering weight yarn, but I mean, on the wraps per inch of a sport and a fingering, they're actually really close, so I'm just rolling with it. This is from So Happy Jane. She is a local dyer in my area here in Idaho, and she has a Happy Fiber Box subscription that I'm a little bit of a sucker for subscription boxes, and one from a very, very local dyer. Of course I had to go along. So every month I get 2 yarns from her. This is actually from December, and it is a solid and a speckle that month. So I had my box from December and my box from January that I absolutely loved, but I hadn't actually picked a project for them. I kind of assumed eventually I'd make socks with them. But then I decided if I use the yarns from my So Happy Jane subscription boxes, it means I will not just be accumulating the yarn from that, and because I'm a couple months ahead, it allows me to pick my colors a little bit to go with it. So I have this blue. I know I have 2 colors from my January box that I can match with this, and both will look well. And then before I am starting the next color, I will actually have my box for February. So I will be able to check and make sure all my colors are going well together and really blend them well. At the end, it's going to have 12 colors in it, so as long as I keep up with this subscription box all year, if I don't, I can always just pick out some of the fingering weight yarn from So Happy Jane if for some reason the subscription box ends up not working, but I love everything she sent so far, so I can't see that happening right now. The pattern says it's going to be using mosaic knitting, which I have never done, and that might be part of why I decided it would be a good idea to dive in and do that. Maybe that was just a really, really bad idea, but I mean, I haven't cast on yet, But in my brain, I'm committed, so I'm doing this. Hopefully I'll finish it by the end of the year. If not, I'm going to try to start being kind to myself about that now. And we'll see. Maybe I will get halfway through the year and decide I absolutely hate it and I never want to do mosaic knitting. Maybe mosaic knitting will turn out to be my new passion. And that's part of why I wanted to do the mystery knit along. Try something new. I've seen mystery knit alongs before and I've never quite wanted to jump in on one. The one I see most frequently, of course, is the Stephen West mystery shawls every year. And that one's definitely intimidating because those tend to be huge and complicated and the clues are coming out over a month. So if you don't finish it over a month, you're going to see what your finished project is looking like ahead of time. So this one seems to have a little less pressure with a year-long one. I still may end up getting clues spoiled for me, but yeah, I'm already committed in my mind, so we're gonna go ahead with that. So before I get into the new yarn that I have, I will talk a little bit about what I am doing with yarn buying for myself this year. So over the fall, I was a bit stressed and I definitely felt like I was buying yarn just for like that quick fix of serotonin. And I was buying yarn that I didn't have plans for. I was buying yarn that reasonably I couldn't make that many projects. And I was aware of it, but it was so pretty, so I kept doing it. And I am not insulting people who buy yarn as its own hobby. I think there is so much joy in just seeing the pretty yarn on my shelf. But for me personally, it was starting to become a storage issue. Like, I wasn't seeing pretty yarn on my shelf. I was seeing a box of yarn in the middle of the room that I was tripping over because I had nowhere to put it. So I did a little bit of cleaning and rearranging in my space so that my yarn is not falling all over the floor anymore. And I am trying to track the yarn that I buy versus the yarn that I use. And I'm hoping that it will make me a little bit more aware of my choices of buying yarn. Like, am I buying yarn that I know I reasonably cannot use? And if I am doing that, am I okay with it? Like, is this at a healthy level of buying yarn, or am I getting it a little much? So far, just tracking it has helped. I have a, don't fall over, a notebook. It came in my Hobbii Advent calendar, and it's not a very pretty, I tried to decorate a little bit and it went bad. But I have set slight rules for myself with this. So because my biggest concern with my yarn stash is storage, when yarn comes in, I am writing it down. Even if I know I'm going to be casting something on with it as soon as I can, it is still going in as yarn in, because until that project is completed, I have to store it somewhere. And because storage is my biggest concern, it is not being written as yarn out until I have completed that project. And I figure this because while I could say that, say, my pants, the Mega Ball is a big chunk of yarn and it's not on my shelf anymore, but what happens if I decide I don't want to make those anymore and I frog the project? Well, then I have listed that as out, but I'm still storing it. So until the project is done, until I can completely stop worrying about the storage for that yarn, sorry, my memory card ran out of battery. So, yeah, because storage is my biggest concern until a project is completed and I no longer have to worry about storage of that yarn, it is not being considered yarn out. So, for example, the sweater I made for my daughter, I still have like a half a ball of both the black and the vintage white. So that's still a consideration from storage, so I didn't add those in as yarn out. I have accumulated a bit of tail ends of Bernay blankets, so I'm planning on working the rest of those up into maybe a scrappy corner to corner crochet to finish up all my various colors. I feel like the colors that I have will go well together. It'll look interesting, but interesting is not a bad thing. And when I actually make that, then I will consider them yarn out because the balls of yarn will be gone. If it is something, for example, leftovers of this after I use it in my mystery knit along, this will be considered completed with the leftovers because the leftovers will go into my fingering weight scraps, or I'm still really considering using any leftovers as cuffs for a pair of socks, depending on how much I have leftovers. But the leftovers of like a ball of yarn like this that I know will go into a scrappy project, that is different because I already have storage for fingering weight scrappy yarn. Bernay blanket yarn, even as leftovers, there's a lot of it. So I feel like that one is a little bit different. So with that, I will go a little bit into the yarn that I received and a little bit of the fiber I received. I did receive my January Paradise Fibers Fiber of the Month box, so I will start with that. Every month they surprise me with something different. This month it was, let's see, the themes was extra extra breed all about it. So it was the 3 different breeds of sheep with undyed wool so that you could really experience something different. A lot of people who spin will spin mainly with merino or Corriedale that I have seen because those are readily available. If you just look at roving in a lot of places, you will see a lot of merino. I like merino. I am not complaining about a lot of merino. But this is something fun because you get to try something completely different every month. I know I've ended up going off on a tangent about this twice now, but it's still very, very cool. So I actually just opened up this box this morning. I just received it yesterday. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get to spinning this, but this is a Berg's Shaft sheep. I'm probably going to be butchering these, but this is just some undyed roving. Then I also received warbles. I will write the names of these sheep in the description because I know I absolutely butchered that one. But it is a nice undyed brown. And you can see the little bits of the other shades in there. Like with undyed wool, you definitely get different tones in there. I love the tones in the special blends and special dyes, but there's also something really special about undyed. And then the last one, this is dyed gray heather, but it is some BFL Blueface, is it Leicester? I know this is a breed that I have seen a few people talk about recently. I think it's getting a lot of recognition and it's so soft. So I'm really excited to spin these up. Then I also received, I know I was just complaining about yarn storage, but 2 more Bernay blankets in the color Pink Dust. So these are for my last mini puff jacket for my oldest daughter. She wanted a gray jacket with pink trim and edging. And unfortunately, I ordered them both at the same time with the idea of, oh, it'll be delivered and then I can just work on it. And I have the border, the gray hasn't even shipped. So unfortunately, I can currently finish the project, I cannot start it. And I was a little bummed because I only needed 1 of these for the border, but they said I had to buy at least 2. I mean, the way they're packaged, I can kind of see why, but it's definitely a bummer for storage when you have to buy twice as much because they did not have this color in store at my local Joann's, so I had to order it online. I might try to adapt the mini puff jackets to make a child size because my youngest child, she's 5 years old, she really likes the jacket, but the small size obviously does not go that small when they're made for adults. And she has recently asked me for a pink sweater, so I may try to use some of this to adapt a sweater for her, or it may just go into my scrappy blanket to really fill it out, because I don't want a scrappy blanket that barely fits on my lap. I'd like one that you can actually cuddle in. We'll see what I do with the extra ball. So these are here, unfortunately, until I get my gray. They are just going to sit there and take up space. Something I was trying to avoid. But they are planned for an actual project, so I feel like that is still within the realms of what I was planning of. As soon as I get that gray, I'm going to start this project and make it for my daughter. She's very anxious to have it while it is still cold. But even if it takes me a little while, I know she's still gonna like it. It's a wearable blanket. The other yarn, I ordered this at the same time as that. Over the Christmas holiday, I was talking with my family. I don't remember the conversation, but we were talking about my hand knit socks, and I told my husband, I was like, well, do you want me to knit you some new socks? He doesn't wear my hand knit socks most of the time. I mean, maybe it's a little selfish, but most of my hand knit socks go to me. And he just kind of threw out an offhand, well, I'd be more likely to wear slippers. So naturally that meant I had to find a slipper pattern that he would like and get the yarn to make him one. His favorite color happens to be red, and the pattern called for 2 colors. So I chose to do black, and then it's going to have little red trim. I will show them to you whenever they're started or finished. I mean, it should be a quick project, so theoretically you could only see them as a finished project. But I thought the black would be a really good idea for slippers, because then they're not going to stain well. Even if they're only being worn around the house, you really don't want a nice light colored slipper to be brown from being walked on really quick. And then because he loves red, this nice cranberry, it'll just be a nice little pop of color on it. He didn't get to pick the colors, I picked them for him, but he will probably still wear it. So this is just some Lion Brand Wool Ease in the colors black and cranberry. These are going to be a pair of slippers. Since it's going to be a quick project, I'm hoping I can make those soon, but like I said, I usually max out at about 3 projects, and you can see I had 5 going right now, and another one I'm already planning on, so I really need to, I don't think it's just my yarn buying, I need to make sure I stay within my reasonable expectations for creating. So I only have 2 more yarns that I have recently purchased. I ordered these back in December. I still logged them in. I am logging things in as the month they are received, not the month they are ordered. So if these had come a little faster, I might not have had to write them down in my journal, and then I could have kind of snuck them in and cheated. But I'm not technically writing down my yarns in order to cheat the system. I don't have to do this. This is something I'm doing for me. These are both self-striping yarns from Nomadic Yarns. And this one is the color Sister Winter in the Yak sock base. I've never made socks using yak. I've spun with yak, but I don't think I've ever worked up yak. So I'm really excited to try these. I'm not sure when I will start this pair of socks. I do obviously still have one going. This might be my next one. I do have a lot of sock yarn I like. The other colorway is Heat Wave in the Twisty Sock. So the Twisty Sock is an 80-20 superwash merino nylon. The Yak sock is a 70 merino, 20 yak, 10% nylon. So very, very different, but both from the same dyer. And I've recently had a little bit of a love of self-striping sock yarn again. It's something I used to work up a lot of a long time ago, and then I saw a lot of hand dyers with their speckled yarn and their other colorways that just happened to not be striping, but the colors were so beautiful. I stopped buying self-striping for a little while, and I think so many people's Advent yarn socks Like, I did not know people made Advent sock sets where you would just knit a stripe of these self-striping yarns for every day of Advent until I saw people already knitting them this year, and I'm so sad I missed out on it last year, but self-striping yarn kind of scratched that itch a little bit. Next year I'm going to have to make sure I get some of that Advent self-striping yarn. And I will be making some Advent socks from an Advent set I made. That's just another one of those sock yarn projects. I'm not sure when I'm going to start, but I absolutely know I'm going to do it. So that is all of the new yarn and fiber that I received in the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure if every time we talk I will have new yarn or fiber. So I did say that I am a little bit of a sucker for a subscription box. I have my So Happy Jane subscription box. I signed up for a Muse 2320 sock club this year, and I also signed up for a quarterly sock or fingering weight sock yarn club from Fangirl Fibers. It was Muppet themed, so I had no choice. I had to get it. And so those will all be coming in at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I will definitely still have more yarn to show you as I get it. But as I said, I'm trying to pick some yarn from my stash for projects, and only buy yarn for projects where it's like, I know I want to cast this on, I have a very specific purpose for it, but I just don't happen to already have that yarn. I know a lot of people keep like big bulky yarns on hand. I tend to be much more sock yarns on hand because I can make a whole project from this one little thing and it doesn't take up a lot of room, so I don't feel as bad buying it just because it's pretty. So those are my new yarns and my current projects, my finished projects, and my future projects. So that's most of what I have. The only other things I guess to talk about is just life in the last couple weeks. I did recently go back to school, so that's definitely going to mean some projects take a little bit more time because I have different amount of time to devote to them, and some projects will be a little bit simpler. Stockinette stitch is absolutely wonderful for when I am sitting in lectures. I know people have different opinions as to whether or not you need to be knitting while you're doing things like that. I personally am just of the opinion that there is never a time that you don't need to be knitting, and there's never a time that you absolutely are not allowed to be knitting. For me, having something in my hands helps me concentrate and focus, and I know that that's true for a lot of people, but it's not true for everybody, so just do what makes you happy. And speaking of doing what makes me happy, I am going to end this now because I've got a nice stack of projects sitting over there, and I have at least one that I think I can finish this weekend. I really think I can finish that square this weekend. And I'd love to be showing a whole bunch of exciting things next week. I have this that I am just itching to cast on, and I can't stop squishing it. So that is all for now. I will speak to you guys again in a couple of weeks and hopefully have some exciting new things to show you. Have a wonderful making.